The death of Princess Margaret of Connaught, Crown Princess of Sweden and Duchess of Scania. Princess Margaret was born at Bagshot Park on the 15th of January 1882. She was then baptised 3 months later in the private chapel of Windsor Castle on the 11th of March 1882 by Archibald Campbell Tait, Archbishop of Canterbury. Please continue to support my channel by subscribing. Princess Margaret was known as Daisy to her family. Her mother was Princess Maria Anna of Anhalt, and her father was a nephew of the German Emperor Wilhelm I. He was also related to the German Emperor Friedrich III, the husband of her sister-in-law Victoria, Princess Royal. Margaret was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria and grew up as a member of the British royal family. When Princess Margaret of Connaught was 23 and her younger sister Princess Patricia of Connaught was 18, both girls were among the most beautiful and eligible princesses in Europe. They had become of age and were actually a lot older than the average princess to look for a groom. King Edward VII had taken over as the matchmaker of Europe from his mother Queen Victoria, and he had wished for his nieces to marry the very best, with a match being made with European kings or crown princes. In January of 1905, the Connaught family went on a cruise to the Mediterranean and the Nile in search of eligible partners. The Duke and Duchess of Connaught visited Portugal to meet with King Carlos and his wife, Amelia of Orleans. It was the couple's sons who would entertain the young princesses. The Portuguese were excited about a potential marriage proposal to one of the princesses in the hopes that they would go on to become the future Queen of Portugal. But unfortunately for the people, no such thing occurred. The Connaughts continued their trip to Egypt and the Sudan, stopping off in Cairo, where Margaret met and fell in love with Prince Gustaf Adolf of Sweden, grandson of the Swedish King Oscar II. Patricia, Margaret's sister, had initially been considered as a bride for Gustaf, although he was unaware of the secret match. An official meeting was held with both of the sisters, but he only had eyes for Margaret, whom he proposed to during a dinner hosted by Lord Cromer at the British Consulate in Egypt. She accepted, as she too had fallen in love at first sight. Luckily for the pair, both sets of parents were happy with the match, and they were allowed to marry on the 15th of June 1905 in St George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. One of Margaret's wedding presents was the Connaught tiara, which remains in the Swedish royal jewellery collection today. The couple spent their honeymoon at Adair Manor in County Limerick, Ireland, and arrived in Sweden on the 8th of July 1905. She was keen to learn the Swedish language and history in a bid to win over the Swedish public. She got involved in organising supply drives and acted as a middle neutral ground between Allied and Axis countries that were impacted by the war. With her help, private letters and requests to trace men missing in action were passed on. She was also active in her work on behalf of prisoners. She aided prisoners of war in camps around Europe, especially British nationals. Margaret's efforts during the war were pro-British, in contrast to her mother-in-law's strictly pro-German attitude. The couple had 5 children, and Margaret was a dedicated mother to her children and was determined to spend time with them, despite it being the norm for nursery staff to care for them instead. She was very hands-on and loved spending her days with the children. When Gustaf Adolf's father, Crown Prince Gustaf, acceded to the throne as King Gustaf V in 1907, the couple became Crown Prince and Princess of Sweden. The marriage between Margaret and Gustaf Adolf was a happy one based on pure love rather than being arranged, which was the norm in the day. Gustaf Adolf loved Margaret's English culture and compared to the great pressure that he was under by the Prussian military discipline, he much preferred it. Infanta Eulalia of Spain visited them and noted that the Crown Princess gave the Swedish court just a touch of elegance of the court of St. James's. She also noted that Margaret seemed to love her life in Sweden. When she arrived in Sweden, Margaret was referred to as Margareta instead by the Swedish court and people. She was given lessons as she desired in the Swedish language, as well as history, and it took 2 years to speak at a good level of Swedish. She travelled throughout Sweden to gain a better understanding of the culture and history. Margaret was also interested in art and was an admirer of the works of Claude Monet. She photographed, painted, and took a keen attention in gardening. She and her spouse received Ceferio Palace as a wedding gift, and they devoted their summers there and made a wonderful effort creating gardens in an English style on the estate which she included her children in. Margaret was heavily pregnant with her 6th child when she required surgery on her mastoid due to measles that had aggravated her ear. On the back of the surgery, she contracted an infection that led to sepsis, an infection of the blood. Sadly, at 2 o'clock in the morning on Saturday the 1st of May 1920, her father's 70th birthday, Crown Princess Margaret died suddenly in Stockholm. Since the previous Sunday, she had been experiencing pain in her face from something below her eye, and doctors decided to perform another procedure, and on Thursday she started with further symptoms under her right ear. She fell fatally poorly on Friday night, and it was evident that the infection had worsened, and she was now experiencing a fatal case of sepsis that killed her in a mere number of hours while she was 8 months pregnant. Unfortunately, both Margaret and her unborn child both died. The Swedish Prime Minister announced her death during the traditional International Workers' Day celebrations, noting that the ray of sunshine at Stockholm Palace has gone out. The news got back to Britain, and rumours had falsely spread that she had been so unhappy with her life in Sweden that she had committed suicide to escape it. Princess Margaret had left instructions on how she would like to be buried in 1914, only 6 years earlier, and these wishes were followed. As requested, she was buried in her wedding dress and her veil with a crucifix in her hands, in a simple coffin made from English oak, covered in British and Swedish flags. She requested that there should be no lying in state after her death. 3 years later, on the 3rd of November 1923, her husband went on to remarry at St. James's Palace, Crown Prince Gustaf Adolf, to Lady Louise Mountbatten, who was formerly the Princess Louise of Battenberg. The couple would not go on to have any children, and upon his father's death in 1950, Gustaf Adolf became the king at the age of 67. He then reigned over the country until he died at 19 years old in 1973. Please continue to support my channel by subscribing. Please comment, like and subscribe if you wish for more stories, and leave your suggestions below and I will endeavour to cover them.